We are instructed to speak of the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, to tell his story so that each generation might know him, trust him, and keep his commands. Storytelling in the biblical tradition is never just about remembering the past. It's about shaping our present and guiding our future. So today, we want to tell a story that we might think that we know well.
And to question it. Because if we only remember Christmas but never let it question us, we will miss what God is doing. The Christmas story is a story shaped by decisions. Ordinary people standing at extraordinary crossroads. Beneath the angels, the star, and the songs of praise lies a quieter, sharper question. What if they had chosen differently? The Nativity brings together a cast of characters from every corner of society, the powerful and the powerless, the wealthy and the poor, the respected and the despised. Their lives intersect briefly around a fragile, vulnerable child lying in a feeding trough. None of them are interchangeable. Each is essential, and each must decide how they will respond.
I will tell you the story of the wise men, magi from the east, scholars, astrologers, men of learning and of influence. We do not know how many there were, nor do we know exactly where it was that they came from. Only that they noticed, attentive enough to notice, something unusual in the night sky. They saw a star. They saw a sign. They believed that it announced good news, the birth of a king. Not just another king to add to that long line of rulers, the ones who rose and fell, but a better one, a king who was more just, more powerful, and more worthy. And so they left their comfortable palaces behind. They travelled hundreds of miles across unfamiliar territory, driven by curiosity, driven by hope and faith that truth was worth the journey. And their search led them quite logically to Jerusalem, to the palace of King Herod. Surely this was where a newborn king would be found. But Herod was not what they had expected. He just held the scraps of power that Rome allowed him to hold, and he clung to them desperately. When the wise men arrived and spoke of another king, it says that Herod was disturbed. In his weakness, he saw threat rather than promise. Feigning interest, he questioned them carefully, masking fear with politeness. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, asking them to report back. But beneath his words lay deception and violence, a willing to destroy anything that wasn't within his control.
Now let's pause the story. What if the wise men, sensing danger, decided that this journey was no longer worth the risk? They were foreigners in a hostile land, standing in the presence of a volatile ruler. What if they reasoned that wisdom sometimes meant self-preservation? They could have turned back east, returning to safety with their gifts intact, convincing themselves that obedience was optional when it becomes uncomfortable or dangerous. The Christmas story only unfolds as it does because the wise men chose courage over comfort, truth over safety. They kept going.
I will tell you the story of the shepherds, the dirty ones, the smelly ones, the ones you couldn't trust, because it was more likely than not they were fencing stolen goods that had fallen off the back or the first century equivalent of a truck. They were rough, they were vulgar. Every second word was a curse. You wouldn't have invited them to a pub in the roughest part of town, never mind into the presence of a newborn infant. They were most likely infested with lice and with fleas from spending too much time with their sheep. And they were probably drunk from having a dram or 10 to keep out the cold. As they stood on the hillside on a cold winter's night, the sky was filled with light, and an angel appeared. "Go to Bethlehem," he said. "Remember the promises of a child to be born. He will save the whole world. He is the Messiah that you have looked for over multiple generations." This is not a message to make you afraid. It's a message that should fill you with joy. Go look and search and see the baby. He will be in the inn 3 doors down on the left, round the back with the animals. His mother has wrapped him in cloths, and the only place she could put him was the manger. And then the sky was filled with heavenly hosts singing and praising God. "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favour rests." The first invitation is not sent to kings or priests, but to shepherds.
Let's linger here just a moment. What if the shepherds responded with calculation instead of wonder? They just experienced something extraordinary. A supernatural encounter like that would have had cash value. What if, instead of rushing to Bethlehem, they realised how profitable their story could be? They could sell it, embellish it, perform it. A tale like that could have them lifted out of poverty. The Christmas story continues only because the shepherds chose awe over advantage, chose obedience over exploitation.
I will tell you the story of Joseph, a good and upright man, skilled tradesman, and a faithful Jew who attended synagogue, who honoured the Torah, and he travelled to Jerusalem for all the major festivals. The folks of Nazareth respected him. He had standing. He was kind, he was compassionate. Everything any girl could wish for in her husband. He was betrothed to Mary. She was young, she was gentle, she was devout. And their future was mapped out. Marriage, a home, children, a life built quietly and honourably together. Then came a day when the unimaginable happened. Mary came to him to say she was pregnant. Well, unless holding hands suddenly created babies, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it wasn't his. His world collapsed. He was heartbroken, confused, and humiliated. Mary spoke of angels and promises, but how could he believe any of that? And he lay awake at night, wrestling with anger, with fear, love, and shame. The law gave him the right to walk away, and society would have understood. No one would have blamed him.
Again, let's stop our story here. What if Joseph chose reputation over responsibility? What if, to protect his standing, he quietly ended the relationship and left Mary to face pregnancy, the gossip, and childbirth alone? The Christmas story survives because Joseph chose mercy over pride, compassion over convenience.
I will tell you the story of Mary, young, faithful, unmarried, living in a society where honour mattered, where a woman's value was closely tied to her reputation. When an angel appeared to her, Mary was not given an easy task or a comfortable blessing. She was asked to carry a child who would change the world. This was called favour, but it came at an enormous personal cost. There was shame, there was suspicion, and there was risk. Mary knew what happened to women who bore children without husbands. At best, they were shunned, and at worst, they faced violence or death. She understood the consequences of saying yes.
Now let's pause our story one final time. What if Mary said no? What if her fear outweighed trust? Was Mary the first faithful young woman God had approached, or simply the first to say yes? The Christmas story begins because she did. And so we arrive at the stable, not because it was inevitable, but because people chose not to put themselves first. The scene is crowded not by chance, but by courage.
So we reflect on the Christmas story. We need to resist the temptation to keep it at a safe distance as something sweet and familiar and contained within carols and decorations. The Nativity is not simply a scene to admire. It's a mirror held up to each of us. The characters in this story are not only characters, they are invitations. Herod shows us what happens when power becomes an idol, when we would rather destroy hope than surrender control. The wise men show us what it looks like to seek truth beyond our borders, to keep walking, even when the path is dangerous. The shepherds show us that the overlooked are not forgotten, and that worship is often found first on the margins. Joseph, well, he shows us the cost of righteousness, a righteousness that is more than rule keeping, a righteousness that chooses mercy. Mary shows us courageous trust, a yes offered to God even when the consequences are frightening. And right at the centre is the child himself, not a symbol, not a sentimental detail, but the living God who has come close to us, not to make us comfortable, but to make everything new. God doesn't arrive with spectacle or with force. He arrives with vulnerability, not in a palace, but in a stable. Not announced to the powerful first, but announced to the overlooked.
So as we reflect on the Christmas story, we're left with questions that are as challenging now as they were then. What choices are we being invited to make? When comfort conflicts with compassion, which will we choose? When telling the truth costs us something, will we keep going or turn back to where it feels safe? When worship calls us to move, will we step out or stay where we're familiar? When mercy threatens our image, will we stand with the vulnerable or will we seek to protect ourselves? When obedience asks more than we expected, will we still trust? And in the end, will we come to worship the one who makes all things new? Not just to admire a baby in a manger, but to bow before a king whose kingdom upends our own priorities. Not to just sing about peace on earth, but to become people of peace ourselves. And not just to retell the story, but to live it, choosing again and again to say yes.